I'm hoping doing the uploading while I'm also doing this does not cause a problem, but that's okay. We will see here. I'm going to go to YouTube. I'm going to get this disconnected here. All right. There's a notification. Yes, everything is working normal now. I don't know what was going on this morning. That was a disaster of epic proportions. Okay. I'm going to go to YouTube. I'm going to disconnect the chat. All right, that's done. All right. So we'll give it a couple of minutes here and we'll get started. Oh, I'm going to go to, now the map appears not to be working anymore. So yeah, it's been something of every step of the way. There's been problems this morning, but at least the connection looks better. Now this website won't load. I don't know what is going on. There we go. All right, let's find us. How do we sound? Test 1, 2, 3. At least the connection looks better. Now this website won't load. I don't know what is going on. There we go. All right, that's good to go. All right, we'll give it here a few minutes. If you're listening from, Oklahoma just tuned in, thank you so very much. Greatly appreciate it. Always very much appreciated. Lawton, Oklahoma. Went to a Bible Institute there in Lawton, Oklahoma. All right. I'm waiting here, just making sure everything is working correctly, giving a chance for people to tune in for this second broadcast. We may, I think we lost the entire audience from the first broadcast. So, hey, that's okay. I'm going to save this just in case something happens because the upload for the sermon is not going very well. I'm trying to upload the previous message and it's just sitting here stuck. So I'm hoping there's no problems with the uploads today. Now, for the podcast hosting site, it's already on every podcasting platform. It's already gone. I've seen the notifications come in. But as far as the sermon audio platform, the upload is stuck. So I can't fix that right now. I'm not going to even worry about that right now. We're just going to give this a couple of more seconds and then we're going to get started. And hopefully we can get something, we can advance this a little, or this discussion a little further, and we can, yeah, nobody else has seen, I don't know what's going on here. Either the map is not working and the only place that shows up on the map is Oklahoma. Every other state is banned, or the number of people we had for the first hour has decided they're not coming back for the second hour. And that's okay. All right. We'll give it a couple of minutes here. And then we will get started. Maybe. Yeah, I can't wait much longer. It's 11:33. So if we're going to do this, I can't worry about the numbers of people tuning in or not tuning in. I'm just going to ignore that. Not going to worry about it, because if I do, then I'll be trying to figure out what happened and I can't. So let's go back here. All right. Open up my Bible back to Hebrews 10. All right, check the upload. It's stuck. Yeah, the upload is not occurring. I don't know what's happening, but that's okay. We're good to go. The connection seems stable. All right, let's do this. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further delay, we go live in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.
Looking at our world from a theological perspective, this is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
Good morning, everyone. It is Sunday, August the 3rd, 2025. It is currently 11:34 a.m. Central Time, and I'm coming to you live from the Theology Central studio, located right here in Abilene, Texas. Now, for the last live stream that we just completed about, 10 minutes ago, I'm trying to get that uploaded. There's some problems trying to upload it to certain platforms. I don't know exactly what's going on. We will get that uploaded. We had all kinds of technological problems trying to get that live stream started. I'm hoping it all worked out. I'm hoping the upload works out and it will be there. The last live stream was part 3. So what we are doing is we're doing kind of this multi-part series on Hebrews chapter 10, verses 25 through 26. And the reason we're spending all of this time on Hebrews 10, 25 through 26 is because, well, I heard a sermon on Hebrews 10, 25 that just followed the same party line. They just followed the same template that every other church gives, that Hebrews 10, 25 through 26 is about you and I not missing church. Don't forsake the assembly, and that means church. And well, we have been greatly criticizing that approach to the text, and we are working towards a new interpretation of Hebrews 10, 25 through 26. But before we get there, we're doing what I typically do. If you tell me a passage means something, right? You give me your interpretation. Instead of arguing with you, what I typically will do is like, okay, let's say you're right. Now let's walk through this logically and see if your interpretation doesn't collapse under its own weight. So that's what we started doing. So we took the idea of Hebrews 10:25 in the last live broadcast, that Hebrews 10:25 is actually about church attendance. And we started working through some possible problems. The first major problem is, it says, forsake not the assembling of ourselves together. It does not say, okay, this is very important. If you look it up in the Greek, and we clearly demonstrated this in the last broadcast, it does not say, don't forsake the church. It does not use ecclesia. It does not even use the Greek word for synagogue. It doesn't mention that in any way, shape, or form. And I mean, we took this completely and absolutely apart. In fact, I was probably overly redundant in it. So just to summarize what we said about that point, when Hebrews 10:25 tells us not to forsake the assembling of ourselves together, it is not commanding church attendance as a legal duty. It's most likely warning Jewish believers not to abandon the gathered identity of the new covenant people in Christ, even as the old world of the temple, the priesthood, and the Jewish nation is collapsing around them because of the coming destruction that's going to happen in 70 AD. This is not about missing a Sunday. It's about leaving behind the only gathering that remains when everything else is shaken. This is about the Jews, 70 AD, their covenant relationship. There's nothing in this passage that says, hey, don't forsake church, because it doesn't even use the Greek word. In fact, the Greek word it used for assembling is only used in one other place, at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. It's never used for the church. So there's just so many problems with saying this is about not missing church. Well, then you think the writer of Hebrews would have just used, I don't know, church? Just use the word, right? I mean, it would have fixed the problem in 5 seconds, but they do not. The second problem is Hebrews 10, 25. If we make it about the church, it says, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more. Well, so much the more is an intensifier here, right? It is simply saying, hey, you need to do so much the more as you see the day approaching. You have to prioritize church as the end draws near. Well, if this is the case, then the writer is commanding not merely not missing church. He's not simply commending and commanding, hey, you make sure you're attending everything, but he is literally commanding more frequent gathering. So the church then, if we're going to be honest that Hebrews 10:25 is about church attendance, well, you would have more frequent church services. You would have more robust interaction. You would have more active exhortation. You would have more engagement as the day approaches. Otherwise, you're disobeying the very interpretation you're promoting. Well, if we go back to Acts, how frequently did the church meet? Every single day. Well, if Hebrews 10:25 is about church attendance, well, don't forsake the assembly, and so much the more would mean then I guess you're meeting more than once a day? Isn't it funny that the churches that preach don't forsake the assembly, in most cases, maybe have a Sunday school, maybe Sunday morning, most likely not even a Sunday night. Wednesday night is optional for the most part. Wait, where's the so much the more? Most churches that preach Hebrews 10:25 as church attendance, they have fewer meetings than churches in the past generations. They've eliminated Sunday evening. They've removed small groups to bi-weekly, and they have prayer meetings instead of an actual church service, and they treat Wednesday gatherings as optional or casual. So guess what? If Hebrews 10:25 is commanding gathering, and so much the more so as the day draws near, but your church gathers less than ever, you're not obeying the command as you define it. You're teaching one standard and practicing another, and your interpretation is refuting your own hermeneutical structure. If the church truly believes forsaking the assembly leads to apostasy, then what does it mean when the leadership strategically reduces the number of assemblies? Are they unintentionally fostering spiritual coldness? Are they responsible for weakening the body? Are they disobeying the divine imperative to gather more and more? So by their own logic, they're reducing in the number of gatherings is spiritually dangerous. So there's a contradiction in their own interpretation. All right? So if Hebrews 10:25 is a command about church attendance, then so much the more must mean increasing the frequency of church gatherings. Therefore, modern church models with reduced meeting schedules are not in obedience to the passage and are in fact disobeying it by their own standard. So this seems to expose that their own interpretation is not even consistently practiced, so something is severely wrong at that moment. But this leads us to another problem. So the first problem, church has not even mentioned. The second problem is the so much the more, right? And we're going with the idea, we're trying to criticize the interpretation that is typically given by showing some of the just practical, logical problems with their interpretations. The third one is they interpret so much the more as you see the day approaching. And almost most churches will interpret as you see the day approaching as referring to the second coming. Hey guys, as you see the day approaching, the second coming, you need to be meeting more and more and more and more. So much the more as you see the second coming approaching. So how do we understand this? Well, some will say that the second coming includes the rapture. Some will go with the rapture. But the rapture, can you see the day approaching for the rapture? Because my understanding, the rapture could happen at any time. Well, then that means you have verses like, of that day and hour, no one knows. Well, if no one knows, then how can I see the day approaching? It will come like a thief in the night. Well, how can I know that the day is approaching if it comes like a thief in the night? It will be unexpected. Well, how am I supposed to see that the day approaching? How could the Hebrew Christians see the day approaching if the day is the second coming, which by all accounts is supposed to be unseen, undated, and unpredictable? And not only that, it says, as you see the day approaching, as it almost seems to be implying it's something they are witnessing occurring. Well, those people that this was originally written to in 64, 66 AD, well, they didn't need to meet more. Because the second coming still hasn't happened, 2,000 years later? So why is he telling, though he's writing specifically to a group of Jews in between 64 and 68 AD, hey, you guys need to meet more. But see, we just read it as it's about us. No, it's about them. What does it even mean to them? Hey guys, as you see the day approaching, is that the second coming? If you look at the original audience, the Jewish Christians in Jerusalem or nearby sometime between 64 to 68 AD, they absolutely could see a day approaching. But it wasn't the second coming. It was the growing hostility from Rome. It was the rise of Jewish nationalist zealots. It was the deepening fracture between Jewish Christians and mainstream Judaism. the prophetic expectation of judgment on the temple system, just as Jesus predicted in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. That is, none of those are about the second coming primarily. They're about the destruction of that temple. So the day here doesn't even make sense to interpret the day there as the second coming. It makes sense that this coming day of judgment upon unbelieving Israel and the destruction of the temple in AD 70. And so if this is telling them, don't forsake the assembling, whatever the assembling is, it's definitely not the church or the synagogue because it doesn't even use those words. So much the more, whatever that means, it means increase it, be even more committed to it, right? As you see the day approaching, well, then this was as a reference to them seeing the coming judgment of 70 AD. So even if if you try to make this the church, you're literally destroying the total meaning of this verse. If you went back to 64 AD and said, guys, don't miss church because the second coming is on its way, they would look at you like you're out of your ever-living mind because the second coming did not happen in 65, 66, unless you're going to go full-blown preterist and tell me that Jesus came back in 70 AD. Well, then this passage has been completely fulfilled. They met more, 70 AD happened, Jesus came back, the end. So you're going to say, well, no, Jesus didn't come back in 70 AD. Well, then this verse had no meaning to them. So hey, as you see the day approaching, well, it has nothing to do with you. This is about the second coming. Don't worry about it, guys. Just continue as you were. But if you look at this passage in its context, Hebrews has an urgency to it. Why is there such an urgency in Hebrews? Because these people only have 4 or 5 years left, maybe even 3 or 2 years left before everything's going to be destroyed of the old covenant system. And this matches the warnings in Hebrews 10. If you look at 26 through 31, there's these strong warnings. But a certain fearful looking for of judgment and fiery indignation, which shall devour the adversaries. He that despised Moses' law died without mercy under 2 or 3 witnesses. Of how much sore punishment suppose ye shall be though thought worthy, who hath trodden under the foot of the Son of God, and hath counted the blood of the covenant wherewith he was sanctified an unholy thing, and have done despite unto the Spirit of grace. I mean, there is strong warnings here. Why? Because it's referencing what's coming in 70 AD. And the use of the word day as judgment language, this fits Old Testament, Isaiah, Joel, Amos, which uses that idea as you see the day approaching, which all then fits the Old Covenant concept, and the Old Covenant concept is about to be destroyed for that system in 70 AD. So if Hebrews 10:25 through 26 is interpreted to mean go to church more as the second coming approaches, well, the first issue is, wait a minute, what are all those passages about it comes as a thief in the night? Nobody knows the day and the hour. I know you can say, well, we can interpret the signs. Then typically, you know where you go to find the signs? Matthew 24. Wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes, those all pointing to 70 AD. So you're going to find yourself just contradicting yourself again. Jesus seemed to say the day would come unexpectedly like a thief, not something you see drawing near. So then how do you reconcile that? And this is very important. No other writer in the New Testament urges more church attendance, more church meetings based on the sign of Christ's return. There's nowhere else in the New Testament say, hey, Jesus is coming back. Go to church more. But that's somehow how we interpret Hebrews 10. The audience, Hebrews 10:25 is written to, did see a day approaching. In fact, we can talk about hang on. I'm going to ask, okay, when did the siege of Jerusalem leading to its destruction in 70 AD begin? All right, doing some searching here. So really, I guess about March of 70 AD. So actually 64 to 68 AD, the actual siege begins on 70 AD. All right. The tensions had started building in 66 AD. So tensions and problems and signs that things were getting bad started as early as 66 AD. If you're writing this between 64 to 68 AD, you may be writing this to people literally witnessing the building of the situation. Literally. So as they see the day approaching, they literally would be living and watching the day approaching. And then, of course, if you try to make this about church attendance, and we've got to have more church attendance as we see the second coming getting nearer, how exactly do you measure whether the day is closer? How do you measure that? Well, you say, well, I'll go to Matthew 24 and look at those signs. Those signs are about 70 AD, so that doesn't even make any sense. What signs are you pointing to? And I've been hearing that the second coming is 5 seconds away since I was a kid. Okay? My entire life I've been hearing, oh, Jesus is about to come back. Jesus is about to come back. Jesus is a come back. And guess what I haven't seen? I haven't seen an increase in church meetings. I've seen a decrease of church meetings. In fact, when I moved back to Texas in the year 2000, we could not find a church that had Sunday school, Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday. In fact, finally, when we found one, it was like, okay, and even their Wednesday was a little bit of a joke. But at least they had Sunday school, Sunday morning, and Sunday night. Most churches had eliminated Sunday night throughout Wednesday, or Wednesday was just a little, I don't even know what it was. It was basically, you could listen to you could read a 5-minute devotional on the way to church and get more than you got when you actually got there. So if I hear Jesus is coming back, Jesus is coming back, well, then have more church services. Somebody's got to make up their mind how to interpret Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25. So if Hebrews 10:25 is about church attendance, then as you see the day approaching, it must be observable. But the second coming, in some cases would say, well, is it observable? Is it not? Is it predictable? Is it measurable? So therefore, the day cannot seem to refer to the second coming, even under their own interpretation, I don't think. I think it's more consistently and textually and historically accurate to say something like this: the day equals the coming covenantal judgment on the old system, culminating in the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD. Well, the minute I can reduce this verse to saying, guys, don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together as the manner of some is, as you see the day approaching, and so much the more so as you see the day approaching. Well, then if I can clearly identify what day that's referring to 70 AD, then all of this verse has nothing to do with me and with church. This has everything to do with them and their immediate historical situation. In fact, you're getting very close to being able to prove that this is prescriptive. It's not even, or this is descriptive. It's not prescribing anything for us. It was prescribing something to Jews between 64 and 68 AD. Guys, assemble, whatever that assembly is. And it doesn't say go to church, and it doesn't say go to the synagogue. And so if the day approaching is 70 AD, I'm sorry, then this verse has nothing to do with us. And I know that's going to tick off everyone, but that's okay. You can try, but if you're going to interpret this way, and we put it this way, we've got to be pretty close to the second coming compared to where we were in the book of Acts, and they were meeting every single day. So if you're going to say this is about church, then I don't want you to argue with me. I want you to shut up, and I want you to go to church 2 to 3 times a day. And if your church is doing that, okay. If your church is not doing that, then you're literally sinning willfully, and there's no more sacrifice for sins. You better be worried about your own salvation and leave me alone. But we have to do a little bit more work on Hebrews 10:25. But exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. And so much the more, this seems to be kind of a comparative kind of construction. As you see seems to be kind of a present, active, indicative. I looked up some Greek grammar trying to understand exactly what was going on. Some say second person plural. Okay, so I just looked up a bunch of notes. Drawing near seems to be a present, active participle. All right. The day, a direct object of see. You see the day. That's what you're seeing. So the literal reading would go something like this, or the literal rendering, I guess, would go something like this. But exhorting one another, and all the more as you are seeing the day drawing near. This is a temporal comparison clause based on real current experience. It's as if the text is saying, hey, don't forsake the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some. You need to exhort one another, so much the more as you are seeing the day approaching. It's spoken of as if you are witnessing this right now. This is not about us. This is about them. You are doing X increasingly because you are seeing Y happening. The grammar does not say, if you see the day approaching someday in the distant future, when that day fully arrives, in case that day sneaks up on you, hey, just be looking out for the day, and when it gets here, then make sure you're meeting more and more and more. That's not what it's saying. The grammar is saying, you see the day drawing near right now. You see it. And it is happening presently. It's an observable to the original audience. You guys are witnessing the day happening right now. So don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together. So if the day refers to something future, unseen, and unpredictable, like the second coming, the grammar of the verse itself collapses. It makes no sense to say you're seeing something drawing near that by definition cannot be seen or known by drawing near, or known to be drawing near. The grammar is supporting the day is visible, the day is observable, the day is recognizable, it's already approaching in the time that this is written, and it's providing the motivation for urgency in the passage. What could be seen in real time? If you go to mid to late 60 AD, here's what they could see. All right. And I had to look this up. They were seeing mounting persecution. That's a fact. They were seeing a growing divide between Judaism and Christianity. They were seeing temple corruption and priesthood politics. Now, for that, you have to look at Josephus. I know some people question his accuracy, but he would say, hey, the temple was already being corrupted. Priesthood politics, or not policies, politics was already being corrupted. Roman occupation was getting increasingly unstable, and zealot uprising began to happen starting around 66 AD. And the fulfillment of Jesus' prophecies in Matthew 24, when you see, in Matthew 24, look what he says here. And Jesus said unto them, take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come, and you shall hear. And all these things are the beginning. So many shall be offended, and many false prophets. And he begins to say, when you see all of these things occurring, when you begin to see all of these things happen, then you have to know. Well, those things are referring to things leading to 70 AD. They were observable. They were seen. They were predicted by Jesus himself, so they would know when the destruction of the temple was coming. So this was all laid out for them. And history itself shows that around 66 AD, they would have seen, and people would have started getting an idea. Something bad is on its way. And they had Jesus' own words predicting it. They were watching in real time the end of the old covenant order unfold. This was not some abstract future. It was a real looming historical judgment. It's just ridiculous to make this about church. This is about, guys, don't forsake. Whatever the assembling is becomes almost irrelevant at this point, because whatever the assembly is, and they need to do it so much the more, whatever that means, it all becomes ridiculous, because as they see the day approaching, that places this verse in its only interpretive context. That is, these guys witnessing this, they were to do something. It's not even about us figuring out about how much church attendance we should get. So the grammar here really works for us. Does the Greek grammar say they will see the day one day? No, it doesn't say that they will see the day one day. Does it say that they're seeing it approaching now? Yes, the grammar is saying you are witnessing it happening right now. Does it refer to the second coming? Not grammatically or logically. What does it refer to? Well, a visible looming day of covenantal judgment, which happened in 70 AD. If someone is going to insist that Hebrews 10:25 is about church attendance, they are logically and grammatically forced to include neglecting church attendance as part of the willful sin described in verse 26. So this just leads us to the next problem. So what are our problems so far? If we make this about church, well, not forsake the assembling. The assembling there does not refer, it's not the Greek word for church or the Greek word for synagogue. So this seems to be referring to something unique because the Greek word is only used in one other place, which is 2 Thessalonians, and it seems to be about being gathered to God or gathered into Christ or unto Christ. It doesn't seem to be referring to meeting in a place. As so much the more, if this is about church, then you should be having more and more and more church. And as you see the day approaching, that makes no sense to be referring to the second coming, because if it refers to the second coming, the whole thing falls apart grammatically, because they are actually seeing it happening. So right now we've already kind of destroyed the normal interpretation. But let's go down to verse 26. For if we sin willfully. All right, so if someone is going to insist that Hebrews 10:25 is about church attendance, they are logically and grammatically forced to include neglecting church attendance as part of the willful sin described in verse 26. Verse 26 begins with a conjunction. Conjunction, what is your function, right? It connects it to verse 25. So what you would have to say is, guys, verse 25 is about not missing church. Verse 25 is about having church even more as we see the second coming approach. That's how most pastors preach it. Well, if that's the case, not to miss church or not to have church more frequently, you are willfully in sin. Verse 26 begins with for. This is a casual conjunction. It signals that verse 26 explains or justifies what was said in verse 25. In other words, the warning in 26 is grounded in or flows from the exhortation in 25. So let's follow my typical method. Let's say this is about church. Don't skip church. If 25 is don't miss church, don't abandon church, don't skip church. Then 26 is if you sin willfully, you may face eternal judgment. So in other words, if you skip church, you're sinning willfully, you could face eternal judgment. Because of the 4 and 26, you must now interpret sinning willfully to at least include or even center on willfully missing church. At least that has to be a part of what sinning willfully includes. Now, so then you're forced into one of two impossible corners. Skipping church is potentially damnable, willful sin, which leads to legalism, fear, and an inconsistent application. Or verse 26 is not really connected to verse 25, which contradicts the grammar. Either way, their interpretation collapses under its own weight, and they run into problems. And when we reviewed the sermon over the last few days that we started all of this discussion, he was like, well, you're not going to have a warm heart towards the sacrifice of Jesus. That's not what it says. It says there's no more sacrifice for sins. And so pastors at this point will start kind of going, well, verse 26 is just a general warning about sin. Well, then why the conjunction that grammatically ties it to the specific sin in verse 25? Well, missing church isn't enough to be willful sin. It's about an attitude. Then why preach verse 25 as if skipping services is spiritually deadly or spiritually dangerous? Well, the passage is warning about apostasy, not behavior, but you just claim skipping church is what's in view in verse 25. You can't preach 25 as behavioral law and then 26 as some kind of theological abstraction. It destroys all logic and it makes no sense. If verse 26 is describing apostasy, somehow deliberately, some kind of deliberate rejection of Christ, then verse 25 must be about something deeper than missing the service. If we're going to say 26 is describing some kind of full-blown apostasy, like some kind of deliberate rejection, therefore there's no more sacrifice for sin, well then verse 25 has to be about something more than just missing a church service. Therefore, forsaking the assembly must mean abandoning the covenant community of Christ, not merely skipping church. Only this interpretation allows verse 25 and 26 to connect logically, theologically, and grammatically without collapsing into some kind of legalistic absurdity. You have to make it all make sense. Hey, whatever is going on in 26, if it's connected to 25, it's got to be something deeper than just a church service, because you end up with no sacrifice for sins. So guess how this would work? If we're going to accept the popular interpretation of Hebrews 10:25 as a command about church attendance, and then you take verse 26 seriously, especially with its casual conjunction for, then we're forced to conclude, are you ready? Not only is forsaking the assembly a willful sin, but failing to gather more and more as the day draws near. In other words, you're not increasing the frequency of your meetings, must also be categorized as willful sin. This is the inescapable logical consequence of that interpretation. And this is where it falls apart. Hey, guys, don't forsake the assembly. You guys need to be here on Sunday. No. The verse says that the willful sin would include not only missing church, but not meeting so much more so as you see the day approaching. So if you're not having more frequent meetings, just getting people there on Sunday is not enough. Everyone's going to be in willful sin, and the church leadership is going to be in willful sin because they've canceled services instead of increasing them. So this would work this way. Hebrews 10:25, don't miss church. Not forsaking the assembly, go to church. So much more as you see the day approaching, attend church more often as the end nears. Hebrews 10:26 equals, if you sin willfully, there is no sacrifice for sins left. This is the logical progression of thought. Now, if we apply that logic, that would make verse 25 a law. That makes all of its parts obligations. Don't forsake the assembly, obligation. Encourage one another, obligation. So much the more, increase the frequency of gathering. Therefore, if you're not gathering more frequently, even if you're still gathering, you're still disobeying the command. You've got to be meeting more frequently. And disobeying this means you're sinning willfully. So if a pastor interprets Hebrews 10:25 this way, well, then skipping church is willful sin. You're in danger of no sacrifice remaining. If you're not increasing attendance over time and increasing the meetings, you're willfully sin. You have the same danger of no sacrifice remaining. Having fewer church meetings is a collective willful sin. Maintaining the status quo, same weekly schedule, is still disobedience to the phrase, so much the more. So either way, guess what? Unless you're increasing the number of services, and how far can you increase it? How much do you increase it? If you increased it by one service 10 years ago, Well, you're even much more closer to the day that's approaching, so you should be up to at least 5 more services. And then 5 years later, you should be up to, at this point, you should probably be meeting, since this command was given 2,000 years ago, well, we should be basically meeting, 15 times a day. So if we follow this logically, not only are the individuals in trouble, the entire church that does not increase the gathering frequency are in corporate sin, they're willfully disobeying, and they're at risk of having no sacrifice for sin. That's what logic requires. I'm just being honest. I'm trying to be consistent. Most churches that teach Hebrews 10:25 this way do not meet more frequently over time. They usually have fewer gatherings than in past decades. They even discourage additional services. They remove Sunday night. They reduce Wednesday gatherings. So by their own interpretation, they're modeling willful sin by not obeying the so much the more and placing themselves under the threat of having no sacrifice for sin. That just leads you to absurdity. So we play such games with the Bible. Oh, we'll take some verses. Oh, these people are in so much trouble. They're committing a horrible sin. They're going to go to hell. They're disgusting. They're vile. We've got to get rid of them. And then we come to Hebrews 10:25 through 26 and go, well, we're not going to get too carried away with this. We just need people to show up on Sunday and give their offering. So to avoid the absurd conclusion, I think we have to say, Hebrews 10:25 is not about church attendance. It's about not abandoning the gathered covenantal community of Christ under pressure of persecution. So much the more is about increasing its mutual encouragement and perseverance in community, not counting services on a calendar. Sinning willfully refers to apostasy, the willful rejection of Christ and his once-for-all sacrifice, not missing a service or failing to increase your church's schedule. This seems to restore some level of coherence and grammar and theology and historical context to this discussion. And look where this leads us. If Hebrews 10:25 is about church attendance, then failing to attend or increase attendance becomes willful sin. And according to the text, willful sin leads to no more sacrifice for sin. This leads to an inescapable, messy, and theological disastrous conclusion. Skipping church is a damnable offense. Failing to meet more is high-handed rebellion. No sacrifice means eternal damnation. That's the theological corner no honest teacher should want to be in. So what do many pastors do to avoid it? They start explaining it away. Once they realize the implication of their interpretation, they must always backpedal by trying to qualify or reinterpret. And so they'll say, well, they'll try to say something. It's not about every time you miss church. It's just about habitual missing. So habitual missing means there's no more sacrifice for sin. This seems to be saying that if I don't go to church, I am not saved, which would then seem to say, you say, well, if you're truly saved, you will go to church, meaning if I don't go to church, I'm not saved. This seems to turn salvation as dependent upon church, which is very Catholic. They may try to say, but the Greek word here is, it's about abandoning, it's deserting. It's about people who desert the church. So if you believe in Jesus and believe in his sacrifice, but you desert the church, then you go to hell? And didn't Jesus die then for the sin of missing church? Or is that the unpardonable sin? Sinning willfully means rejecting Christ entirely. It's not about missing church. But you just said that verse 25 is about church attendance, and verse 26 begins with for, which is a conjunction, meaning it flows from 25. Well, the warning is hypothetical. It doesn't apply to real believers. What? Why does the author of Hebrews consistently warn professing believers? You can look in Hebrews 3, Hebrews 6, Hebrews 10. Well, it's about attitude, not behavior, but your interpretation is built on external behavior, church attendance, not internal belief. So I think once again, we have to say, look, Hebrews 10:25 is not about church attendance. It's about abandoning the covenant community under pressure. The forsaking is apostasy, not missing services. The day approaching is visible judgment on apostate Judaism, AD 70. The willful sin is deliberate turning away from Christ. And if you go back to Hebrews 10, look at all the things that Christ has done. You start seeing them in 19. You're leaving all of that to go back to the old system. And if you go back to the old system, there's not going to be a sacrifice left. So I got notes here. I'm skipping a lot of this. It all falls apart. All right, I think I'm gonna stop there. I think we've taken it all apart. If you got not forsaking the assembly there does not refer to church. It's not the Greek word ecclesia. It's not the Greek word for synagogue. It's something else. So whatever the assembling of ourselves together, you can't say that's about church because it literally doesn't use the word church. All right. As the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more, if you're going to make it about church, then you have to be increasing church attendance and church meetings dramatically. And I don't know, after 2,000 years, how many church services should we be having because we're supposed to be increasing them? And if you say that as you see the day approaching, it doesn't make sense grammatically that that's referring to the second coming because it's speaking to a specific people. And the text grammatically is literally saying, you are seeing the day approaching now. So this is a reference to 70 AD. The minute I can clearly demonstrate that they were seeing the day approaching when this was written, and that this is about 70 AD, almost begins to destroy everything. And if you're going to make this about church attendance, then I'm sorry. If you're not attending church and you're missing services, and you're not meeting even the more so, you're in willful sin. And if you're in willful sin, well, then there's no more sacrifice for sins. Well, then I guess you're in danger of going to hell. But then you're going to try to backtrack out of that and make 500 excuses to get out of it. And it doesn't make any sense. Maybe the whole reason none of this makes any sense is because your entire interpretation is just historically broken because it's ignoring the historical context. I'll end with setting up the basic premise that we need to move forward. The audience is Jewish Christians living in mid to late 60 AD. They are likely located in or near Jerusalem. They are surrounded by the visible structure of the Old Covenant, the temple, the priest, the sacrifice. They are facing rising persecution. They are under strong temptation to revert back to the Levitical system, back to Judaism, back to the Old Covenant. They are facing an impending crisis. The Jewish-Roman War begins in 66 AD. Jerusalem and the temple will be destroyed in 70 AD. At that time, the sacrificial system, the Levitical priesthood, and all external signs of the Old Covenant will be abolished. That lays the foundation. So immediately you're like, okay, so then what do we have to do? We're going to have to go back and rebuild 25 and 26, right? So the assembling, if we can figure out what that is, we already know that the day approaching is 70 AD. So much the more so is in relation to 70 AD. It has a limited time. So this so much the more has to occur somewhere between 66 AD and 70 AD. Right? So it has a limited time. So if we can figure out what the assembling is, and it's not go to synagogue, it's not go to church, something else is going on here. And if you sin willfully after you've received the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sin. This seems to be a willful rejection of what Christ has done, which is outlined in 19 and following. It's you're returning back to the that whole book of Hebrews is about this. Don't go back to Judaism. Don't go back to the old covenant. If you do, there will be no more sacrifice for sins. That fits that there's not going to be a temple and there's not going to be a sacrificial system. Then immediately we know, okay, wait a minute. This changes the whole meaning of everything. So we will rebuild. I spent all of this time taking apart how 25 and 26 is typically handled. All right? So just to summarize, not forsaking the assembling. The assembling there is not the Greek word for ecclesia, for church, or for synagogue. All right? So immediately we know something is going on. Of ourselves together, ourselves there referring to the Jews at this point in time, but okay. All right. As the manner of some is, but exhorting one another so much more. If this so much the more means an increase, a dramatic increase, well, you need to be meeting more and more and more. Well, okay, what does that even mean? And as you see, the day approaching cannot be the second coming at 70 AD. So the assembling, whatever it is, needs to occur more and more and more, whatever that even means. And they need to do so as they see the day approaching, and that has to be 70 AD. If you sin willfully seems to be the idea of going back to the Levitical system and not holding on to Christ. And if you do that, there's not going to be a sacrifice for sin because that sacrifice for sin that's in the old covenant system is no longer going to remain. If we just leave it right there, we've already destroyed 99% of preaching in most churches. And all we've done is try to be honest with the text. All right. We'll try to finish this up. I don't know. I don't think I'll get to it today. So maybe I'll try to get to it Monday. I don't know. I'll try to get to it as fast as I can and finish this up because now we have to try to build a new reasonable interpretation. We're already getting kind of close. I know a lot of that was very redundant and I didn't even go through all of my notes because I got probably 5 more pages just kind of reestablishing and rehashing and going through like, no, these interpretations don't work. See, we said, okay, let's pretend that this is about the church, and it just literally falls apart. So if it falls apart, we've got to put it back together. And I think I think the way to destroy it, as you see the day approaching, grammatically, that is, as you are seeing the day approaching. That right there destroys the way pastors preach this verse. It just does. Just does. Because they weren't seeing the second coming unless you're going to go full-blown preterist and say 70 AD was the second coming. What they saw was the destruction of Judaism. For all practical purposes, what Judaism is today is a shell of itself. They don't have a temple, they don't have a priest, they don't have a sacrificial system. It's a shadow. It's nothing. It's void. It's meaningless as far as being historically what their system was supposed to be. And they were going to witness the end of it. And they were watching it unfold in front of them. So what did they need to do? They're going to be dispersed. They're going to be thrown from all throughout the nations. They have to come together under this new identity of who they are in Christ. They're going to have to, it's not meeting so much, it's about not forsaking this being together as here's our identity of what we are in Christ, because our identity as a nation is about to be destroyed and we're going to be dispersed. That fits far better than everything else that you hear. All right, I'll stop. All right, thanks for listening. I apologize if I can criticize this all day and its organizational setup, but that's okay. There's nothing I can do about it. We just finished it. So life is what it is. I hope it was beneficial in some ways. Thanks for listening, everyone. Have a great day. Go figure out Hebrews 10, 25 through 26. Discuss it. Go argue about it over lunch. God bless.